The morning mist clung to the aspens like ghostly fingers as the white Ford Transit Connect van pulled off Highway 89, its tires crunching on the gravel road that led deeper into the Bridger Teton National Forest. It was August 27th, 2021, and the Wyoming wilderness stretched endlessly in every direction, a canvas of towering peaks and emerald valleys that had drawn countless adventurers seeking solitude and Instagram-worthy moments. For Gabby Petito, this remote corner of the American West represented everything she had dreamed about when she and her fiancé Brian Laundrie set out from New York 2 months earlier on their cross-country van life journey. The 22-year-old aspiring travel blogger had transformed the modest van into a mobile sanctuary, complete with a makeshift bed, storage compartments filled with camping gear, and enough technology to document every mile of their planned 4-month odyssey across America's national parks. Her Instagram account, which she had carefully curated to reflect the freedom and beauty of life on the road, showed sun-drenched photos of red rock formations, pristine lakes, and the couple's shared adventures in places most people only see in magazines. But somewhere in these ancient mountains, between the last confirmed sighting of Gabby alive and the discovery that would shatter her family's world 3 weeks later, something went terribly wrong. The story that captivated millions of Americans and sparked a nationwide conversation about domestic violence, social media influence, and the harsh realities behind picture-perfect online lives began with a simple question from a worried mother. Why hadn't her daughter called? If you're joining us for this investigation, please subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us continue bringing these important stories to light. The Spread Creek dispersed camping area sits like a hidden jewel within the vast expanse of the Bridger Teton National Forest, accessible only by a narrow dirt road that winds through dense stands of lodgepole pine and Douglas fir. It's the kind of place that attracts serious outdoors enthusiasts, people who prefer the raw authenticity of primitive camping to the manicured comfort of established campgrounds. Here, visitors can claim almost any spot they choose, as long as they follow the basic rules of leave no trace camping and respect the delicate ecosystem that has thrived here for millennia. On that late August afternoon, surveillance cameras at a Whole Foods store in Jackson, Wyoming, captured what would become the final confirmed footage of Gabby Petito alive. The timestamp read 2:11 p.m. as the white van entered the parking lot, followed by another shot at 2:14 p.m. showing the couple entering the store. By 2:30 p.m., they had completed their shopping and returned to their mobile home, where they sat for nearly 20 minutes before pulling out onto Highway 89 at 2:56 p.m., heading north toward the national forest that would become the center of one of the most widely followed missing person cases in recent American history. The van's journey from Jackson to Spread Creek represents only about 30 miles of paved and dirt roads, but it marks the transition from civilization to true wilderness. As Highway 89 curves north past Jackson Lake, the landscape transforms from tourist-friendly resort town to the untamed backcountry that early explorers and fur trappers knew as some of the most challenging terrain in North America. The Teton Range rises like a jagged wall to the west, its granite peaks still crowned with snow even in late summer, while the Gros Ventre Mountains roll away to the east in waves of forest and meadow. For Gabby, who had grown up in the suburban comfort of Long Island, this wilderness represented both the ultimate adventure and perhaps something more intimidating than she had anticipated. Her social media posts from earlier in their trip showed a young woman clearly enamored with the natural beauty she was encountering. But friends and family would later recall subtle changes in her messages and phone calls as the journey progressed. The carefree enthusiasm of their early stops in places like Zion and Arches National Parks seemed to give way to something more complex, moments of stress and tension that she tried to hide behind carefully filtered photographs and upbeat captions. The Spread Creek area itself covers several square miles of rolling terrain, dotted with sagebrush, wildflower meadows, and clusters of aspen trees that turn brilliant gold in autumn. Small creeks meander through the landscape, eventually feeding into the Snake River system that drains much of western Wyoming. During the peak summer months, the area attracts photographers drawn by the dramatic backdrop of the Teton Peaks, hikers exploring the numerous trails that crisscross the region, and van life enthusiasts like Gabby and Brian, who seek the perfect balance of scenic beauty and accessible camping. But the very remoteness that makes Spread Creek appealing to adventurous travelers also makes it a place where someone could easily disappear without a trace. Cell phone coverage is sporadic at best, with dead zones extending for miles in any direction. The nearest permanent human habitation lies back toward Jackson, more than an hour's drive, on roads that become treacherous in bad weather. During the shoulder seasons of spring and fall, days can pass without another soul venturing into this particular corner of the forest. This isolation would prove crucial to understanding what happened during those final days of August 2021. Eyewitness accounts, pieced together from other campers and travelers who crossed paths with the white Ford Transit van, suggest that Brian Laundrie was seen leaving the Spread Creek area alone and on foot sometime around August 29th. These sightings, reported to authorities weeks later during the massive search effort, describe a young man hiking alone with a backpack, appearing agitated or distressed, and heading generally south toward more traveled areas of the forest. The significance of these witness accounts cannot be overstated. In a region where seeing another person might be a notable event worth remembering, multiple independent observers recalled encountering a lone male hiker who matched Brian's description during a time frame that investigators would later identify as critical to understanding Gabby's fate. These witnesses described not just his physical appearance, but also his demeanor, nervous, hurried, and apparently eager to avoid extended conversation. Meanwhile, back in Northport, Florida, Gabby's family was growing increasingly concerned about the lack of communication from their daughter. The last genuine contact they had received came in the form of a text message sent from Gabby's phone on August 27th. But something about the message troubled her mother, Nicole Schmidt. The text read, "Can you help Stan? I just keep getting his voicemails and missed calls," referring to Gabby's grandfather. But Nicole knew immediately that something was wrong. Her daughter never referred to her grandfather by his first name, always calling him Grandpa Stan, or simply Grandpa. This seemingly minor detail would later prove to be one of the most significant clues in the entire case. For investigators and family members who knew Gabby well, the formal use of her grandfather's first name represented a red flag that couldn't be ignored. It suggested that either Gabby was under duress when she sent the message, or that someone else was using her phone to communicate with her family. Either scenario painted a troubling picture of what might be happening in the remote Wyoming wilderness. The psychological weight of this realization would haunt Gabby's mother for months to come. In later interviews, she would describe the horrible recognition that her daughter might have been trying to signal for help in the only way she could, using a subtle linguistic cue that only family members would understand. The thought that Gabby might have been asking for help while her family remained thousands of miles away, unaware of the true meaning behind her words, became one of the most painful aspects of the entire tragedy. As August turned to September, the silence from Wyoming became deafening. Another text message arrived on August 30th, this one reading, "No service in Yosemite." But Gabby's family knew she wasn't planning to visit Yosemite National Park. The message felt wrong in every possible way. The location was incorrect, the timing was suspicious, and once again the tone didn't match their daughter's usual communication style. For a young woman who had been documenting every detail of her cross-country adventure on social media, the complete absence of posts or genuine family contact represented a dramatic departure from her established patterns. What made the situation even more alarming was the lack of any response from Brian Laundrie. Family members attempted to reach him through various channels, hoping he could provide some explanation for Gabby's silence. But their calls and messages went unanswered. The young man, who had been sharing every mile of the journey with their daughter, had apparently vanished from communication as well, leaving a void that filled slowly with dread and unanswered questions. The transition from concern to genuine fear happened gradually, then all at once. For parents of young adults, especially those embarking on adventures far from home, there's always a delicate balance between respecting independence and maintaining enough contact to ensure safety. Gabby had been good about checking in regularly throughout the early stages of their trip, sharing photos and stories that reassured her family that she was safe and happy. But as the days stretched without word, that reassurance turned to worry, and worry began its relentless transformation into panic. By early September, as the calendar moved inexorably forward and still no genuine contact came from Wyoming, Gabby's family faced the terrible realization that something had gone very wrong in the wilderness they had only seen through their daughter's Instagram posts. The mountains that looked so beautiful in her photographs suddenly seemed menacing and vast, full of hidden dangers and endless places where a person could disappear forever. The van life adventure that had begun with such optimism and excitement now loomed as the backdrop for their worst fears. The first concrete sign that their fears might be justified came on September 1st, when Brian Laundrie returned alone to his parents' house in Northport, Florida, driving Gabby's white Ford Transit van. The sight of the van without Gabby sent shockwaves through both families and raised immediate questions about what had happened during those missing days in Wyoming. For 10 agonizing days, Gabby's family tried desperately to get answers from the Laundrie family, but their attempts at communication were met with silence and eventually referrals to a lawyer. The legal wall that the Laundrie family erected around their son became one of the most controversial aspects of the entire case. While they had every legal right to remain silent and seek legal counsel, the moral implications of their choice struck many observers as callous and suspicious. Here was a young woman missing in the wilderness, her family desperate for any information that might help locate her, and the one person who had been with her during her final days was exercising his constitutional right to remain silent. This silence created a vacuum that was quickly filled by public speculation, media attention, and social media theories. The case began attracting national attention not just because of the mysterious circumstances of Gabby's disappearance, but because of the stark contrast between her carefully curated social media presence and the apparent reality of her situation. The disconnect between the happy couple portrayed in her Instagram posts and the domestic violence incident that had been documented by police in Utah just weeks earlier created a narrative that resonated with millions of Americans who had their own experiences with domestic violence or knew someone who did. The Utah incident, captured on police body camera footage, showed a visibly distressed Gabby during a traffic stop in Moab on August 12, 2021. The footage revealed a young woman in tears, describing a physical altercation with her fiancé that had escalated to the point where witnesses called police. While the responding officers ultimately treated the incident as a mental health crisis rather than a domestic violence situation, the video would later be analyzed frame by domestic violence experts who identified numerous red flags in the couple's behavior and the dynamic between them. For Gabby's family, watching this footage after her disappearance was almost unbearable. They saw their daughter, clearly in distress, trying to explain away behavior that experts would later identify as classic patterns of domestic abuse. They heard her taking responsibility for conflict that appeared to have been initiated by her partner, and they witnessed her apparent belief that she was somehow to blame for the situation. The realization that their daughter had been struggling with these issues while trying to maintain the facade of a perfect relationship on social media added another layer of tragedy to an already devastating situation. The body camera footage also provided crucial insight into the couple's relationship dynamics during the weeks leading up to Gabby's disappearance. Domestic violence experts who analyzed the video pointed out several concerning patterns: Gabby's assumption of responsibility for Brian's behavior, her visible distress and emotional volatility, and Brian's calm, controlled demeanor while she appeared to be falling apart. These patterns, they noted, are consistent with psychological abuse relationships where one partner systematically undermines the other's confidence and sense of reality. As September stretched on without any word from Gabby, her family made the difficult decision to file a missing person report with Suffolk County Police in New York on September 11th, exactly 1 month after the Utah incident. The decision to involve law enforcement marked a turning point in what had been a private family crisis, transforming it into an official investigation that would soon capture the attention of media outlets across the country. The missing person report triggered a chain of events that moved with both agonizing slowness and breathtaking speed. While investigators began the methodical process of gathering information about Gabby's disappearance, social media users and amateur sleuths started their own parallel investigation, scouring through her Instagram posts and YouTube videos for clues about her final location. This crowdsourced detective work would prove surprisingly effective, generating leads and theories that helped focus the official search efforts. One of the most significant breakthroughs came from an unlikely source: fellow van life enthusiasts who had been documenting their own adventures in the same area where Gabby had disappeared. A family from Florida, traveling in their own converted vehicle, had been filming their journey through Grand Teton National Park during the same time frame when Gabby was believed to be in the area. When they learned about the missing person case, they went back through hours of their own footage and discovered something remarkable: a brief glimpse of a white Ford Transit van parked in the Spread Creek area on August 27th. The discovery of this footage marked a crucial turning point in the investigation. For the first time since Brian had returned to Florida alone, authorities had concrete evidence of where Gabby had been during her final days. The van's location in the remote Spread Creek dispersed camping area provided searchers with a specific area to focus their efforts, transforming what had been a needle-in-a-haystack search across hundreds of thousands of acres into a more targeted operation. But even with this breakthrough, the search area remained daunting. The Spread Creek region covers several square miles of rugged terrain, with dense forest, steep ravines, and countless places where someone could become lost or where evidence could be hidden. Search teams from multiple agencies began converging on the area, bringing with them specialized equipment for wilderness searches: cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar, helicopters equipped with thermal imaging cameras, and teams of experienced search and rescue volunteers. The massive search effort that descended on Spread Creek during the third week of September 2021 represented one of the largest coordinated searches in the recent history of Wyoming law enforcement. FBI agents worked alongside local sheriff's deputies, park rangers, search and rescue teams, and volunteers from across the region. The operation required careful coordination to ensure that searchers didn't accidentally compromise potential evidence, while still covering the vast area as quickly and thoroughly as possible. For the search teams working in the field, the Wyoming wilderness presented both opportunities and challenges. The relatively open terrain made it easier to spot potential evidence from aircraft, but the same landscape that looked manageable from above revealed its complexity at ground level. Hidden ravines, dense thickets of brush, and rocky outcroppings created countless places where crucial evidence might be concealed. Stream beds, animal trails, and areas disturbed by wildlife all had to be carefully examined to distinguish between natural disturbances and potential crime scene evidence. The emotional weight carried by the searchers cannot be understated. Many of the volunteers had followed Gabby's case in the media and felt a personal connection to the young woman whose smiling face had become familiar to millions of Americans. They understood that they weren't just looking for evidence in an abstract legal case. They were searching for someone's daughter, sister, and friend. Every overturned rock and examined thicket represented another step toward giving her family the answers they desperately needed. The breakthrough came on Sunday, September 19th, when searchers working in a remote section of the Spread Creek area discovered human remains near the eastern boundary of Grand Teton National Park. The discovery site, located about 900 feet from where the van had been spotted in the amateur filmmaker's footage, appeared to have been deliberately concealed, but not well enough to withstand the intensive search that had been conducted over the previous days. FBI Supervisory Special Agent Charles Jones announced the discovery at a somber press conference that evening, his words carefully measured and professional, despite the emotional weight of the moment. Today remains were found consistent with the description of Gabby Petito, he told the assembled media, declining to provide details about the specific location or condition of the remains. Full forensic identification has not been completed to confirm 100% that we found Gabby, but her family has been notified of this discovery. The confirmation that came 2 days later, on September 21st, transformed the case from a missing person investigation into a homicide. Dr. Brent Blue, the Teton County coroner, announced that the remains were definitively identified as those of Gabby Petito and that the preliminary determination was that her death was a homicide. The cause of death would later be determined to be manual strangulation, a finding that painted a horrific picture of her final moments and confirmed the worst fears of those who had followed her case. For Gabby's family, the confirmation brought a devastating end to the uncertainty that had tormented them for weeks. But it also marked the beginning of a new phase of grief and anger. During those desperate weeks when she was missing, they had held on to hope that she might be found alive, perhaps injured or lost in the wilderness, but ultimately recoverable. The discovery of her remains shattered those hopes, while simultaneously providing the terrible clarity they needed to begin the process of seeking justice. The emotional impact on her parents was visible during every public appearance and interview they gave in the weeks following the discovery. Nicole Schmidt, Gabby's mother, spoke about the moment she received the call, confirming that her daughter's body had been found, describing a pain so intense it felt physical. "They said we found remains consistent with your daughter," she recalled, her voice breaking. "I was crying, and I said you have to be sure, like I have to be sure if I'm making this phone call. They showed me pictures, and I confirmed it was our daughter." The confirmation of Gabby's death also intensified the search for Brian Laundrie, who had been named as a person of interest in the case, but had disappeared from his parents' Florida home on September 13th. His disappearance came just 2 days after Gabby was officially reported missing and represented another twist in a case that had already captivated public attention. The fact that the one person who might have been able to provide answers about Gabby's final days had himself vanished created a sense of frustration and outrage that fueled even more intense media coverage and public interest. The search for Brian Laundrie became its own massive operation. centered on the 25,000-acre Carlton Reserve near his family's home in Florida. This search presented different challenges than the Wyoming operation. Instead of high-altitude wilderness, searchers faced swampland, dense vegetation and terrain that could be hazardous even to experienced outdoors personnel. Alligators, venomous snakes, and areas of unstable ground made the search both dangerous and technically complex. For 5 weeks, the Carlton Reserve search continued with teams of FBI agents, local law enforcement, and specialized units equipped for swampland operations. The operation drew constant media attention and public speculation, with some questioning whether Brian was actually in the reserve or had managed to escape to another location entirely. The Laundrie family's continued silence and legal representation added to the public frustration with what many saw as their lack of cooperation in finding answers about Gabby's death. The resolution came on October 20th, 2021, when searchers discovered human remains in an area of the Carlton Reserve that had previously been underwater due to seasonal flooding. The remains were quickly identified as those of Brian Laundrie, and the medical examiner determined that he had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Near his body, investigators found a notebook containing what appeared to be a confession letter in which Brian admitted responsibility for Gabby's death. The contents of Brian's notebook, later released by his family's attorney, provided some answers while raising new questions about the final days of Gabby's life. In the handwritten pages, Brian claimed that Gabby had suffered what he described as a serious injury during a hiking accident, and that he had made the decision to end her life because she was in unbearable pain and asked him to do so. He portrayed his actions as a mercy killing motivated by love and compassion rather than violence or malice. However, this account directly contradicted the coroner's findings that Gabby had died from manual strangulation with no evidence of the serious injuries Brian described. Medical experts and law enforcement officials viewed his notebook confession with skepticism, noting that many details didn't align with the physical evidence found at the scene or the results of the autopsy. The confession appeared to be an attempt to minimize his culpability and present himself in a more sympathetic light rather than an accurate account of what had actually occurred. For Gabby's family, Brian's confession provided confirmation of what they had long suspected, while offering little in the way of closure or comfort. The narrative he presented of a tragic accident followed by a mercy killing seemed designed to absolve him of moral responsibility for what appeared to be a deliberate act of domestic violence. "We don't believe Brian's version of events," the family stated publicly, expressing their belief that the confession was a final manipulation rather than an honest accounting of Gabby's death. The discovery of Brian's remains and his confession marked the end of the criminal investigation, but it also began a new chapter in the public conversation about domestic violence, social media influence, and the way missing person cases are covered by the media. The intense attention paid to Gabby's case, while ultimately helping to locate her body and determine what had happened to her, also highlighted troubling disparities in how different missing person cases receive public and media attention. The phenomenon that researchers and journalists termed missing white woman syndrome became a central part of the discussion surrounding Gabby's case. Critics pointed out that her case received far more media attention and public interest than similar cases involving women of color, indigenous women, or individuals from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. During the same period that Gabby's disappearance dominated national headlines, hundreds of other people, disproportionately women of color and indigenous individuals, were also missing, often with little or no media coverage. In Wyoming alone, where Gabby's body was found, more than 700 indigenous people have been reported missing in recent years, with many cases receiving minimal media attention or law enforcement resources. The stark contrast between the intensive search for Gabby and the limited attention paid to missing Indigenous women in the same area sparked conversations about systemic inequities in both media coverage and law enforcement response to missing person cases. These discussions, while important for addressing broader social issues, didn't diminish the genuine tragedy of what had happened to Gabby or the legitimate grief of her family. Instead, they highlighted how her case could serve as a catalyst for addressing these disparities and ensuring that all missing persons receive appropriate attention and resources. Several advocacy groups used the attention surrounding Gabby's case to raise awareness about missing Indigenous women and push for policy changes to address these inequities. The social media aspects of Gabby's case also generated significant discussion about the relationship between online personas and reality. Her carefully curated Instagram posts, which showed a happy couple living their best life on the road, stood in stark contrast to the domestic violence incident documented in Utah and the ultimate tragedy that ended her life. This disconnect highlighted how social media can be used to hide painful realities behind carefully constructed facades. Domestic violence experts used Gabby's case as an opportunity to educate the public about the warning signs of abusive relationships and the complex dynamics that make it difficult for victims to leave dangerous situations. They pointed out that the Utah police footage showed classic patterns of psychological abuse, including Gabby's tendency to blame herself for the conflict and her apparent belief that she was somehow responsible for Brian's behavior toward her. The economic aspects of their van life journey also received attention from researchers studying domestic violence. Experts noted that sharing a small living space with limited financial resources and no easy escape routes could intensify existing relationship tensions and make it more difficult for abuse victims to seek help or leave dangerous situations. The isolation of wilderness camping, while appealing to many travelers, could also create circumstances where abuse could escalate without intervention or support from others. For the van life community, Gabby's case prompted serious conversations about safety, particularly for women traveling with male partners. Many experienced van lifers shared advice about safety protocols, communication plans with family and friends, and warning signs that relationships might be becoming dangerous on the road. The case also led to increased awareness about domestic violence resources and support systems that could help travelers who found themselves in dangerous situations far from home. The legal implications of the case extended beyond the criminal investigation into Gabby's death. Her family filed civil lawsuits against the Laundrie family and their attorney, alleging intentional infliction of emotional distress and seeking damages for the pain caused by their silence during the critical weeks when Gabby was missing. These civil cases focused not on Brian's actions, which ended with his death, but on his family's alleged lack of cooperation and their attorney's statements during the investigation. The civil litigation raised complex questions about the balance between constitutional rights and moral obligations. While the Laundrie family had every legal right to remain silent and seek legal counsel, Gabby's family argued that their refusal to provide information that might have helped locate their daughter constituted a form of cruel and unusual punishment that went beyond their legal rights. These cases were ultimately settled out of court, with terms that were not disclosed publicly. The impact of Gabby's case on law enforcement practices and missing person investigations has been significant and ongoing. Many agencies have used her case as a training example for domestic violence recognition and response, particularly in situations involving couples traveling together. The Utah police encounter has been analyzed extensively to identify missed opportunities for intervention and to develop better protocols for recognizing and responding to domestic violence situations. The role of social media and amateur sleuths in solving the case also prompted discussions about the benefits and drawbacks of crowdsourced investigations. While social media users provided crucial evidence that helped locate Gabby's body, their activities also created problems for law enforcement, including false leads, harassment of innocent individuals, and the spread of misinformation. The case highlighted the need for better coordination between official investigations and public involvement while maintaining the integrity of criminal investigations. Legislative responses to Gabby's case have included proposals for improving missing person databases, enhancing domestic violence training for law enforcement, and addressing disparities in how different cases receive attention and resources. Some states have passed laws requiring better coordination between agencies in missing person cases, while others have focused on improving domestic violence prevention and intervention programs. The technological aspects of the investigation also provided lessons for future cases. Cell phone data, social media posts, surveillance footage from businesses, and even amateur photography proved crucial in establishing timelines and locations. The case demonstrated how digital evidence has become indispensable in modern investigations, while also highlighting privacy concerns and the need for clear protocols about how such evidence is collected and used. For the outdoor recreation community, Gabby's case served as a reminder about the importance of safety planning and communication when traveling in remote areas. Many outdoor organizations develop new safety protocols and educational programs focused on domestic violence awareness, emergency communication procedures, and risk assessment for backcountry travel. The media's role in covering the case also received significant scrutiny and analysis. While the intensive coverage ultimately helped generate tips and evidence that aided the investigation, it also raised questions about sensationalism, privacy rights, and the potential impact of media attention on ongoing investigations. News organizations and journalism schools have used the case as a study in ethical reporting on missing person cases and domestic violence situations. The psychological impact of the case on the broader public cannot be understated. For millions of people who followed Gabby's story through social media and news coverage, her death represented a personal loss and a stark reminder of the prevalence of domestic violence in American society. Many people reported that her case prompted them to re-evaluate their own relationships or reach out to friends and family members they were concerned about. Support groups and domestic violence organizations reported increased calls and requests for help during and after the intensive media coverage of Gabby's case. This surge in help-seeking behavior suggested that her story had prompted many other abuse victims to recognize their own situations and seek assistance. Domestic violence hotlines and support organizations used this increased attention as an opportunity to educate the public about available resources and warning signs of abuse. The international attention the case received also highlighted America's domestic violence problem to a global audience. Media outlets around the world covered the story, often focusing on statistical data about domestic violence in the United States and comparing American approaches to domestic violence prevention with those used in other countries. This international perspective provided additional context for understanding the systemic nature of the problems highlighted by Gabby's case. Educational institutions, particularly those focused on criminal justice, social work, and journalism, incorporated Gabby's case into their curricula as a way to teach students about complex social issues. Law schools used the case to discuss constitutional rights and legal ethics, while social work programs examined it as an example of domestic violence dynamics and intervention strategies. Journalism programs analyzed the media coverage to discuss ethical reporting and the responsibility of news organizations in covering traumatic events. The case also had significant implications for the van life and nomadic living movements that had gained popularity during the COVID-19 pandemic. Many people had been inspired by social media influencers like Gabby to embrace alternative living arrangements and remote work opportunities. Her death served as a sobering reminder that the idealized lifestyle portrayed on social media platforms could mask serious problems, and that the isolation inherent in nomadic living could create unique vulnerabilities. Recovery and healing for Gabby's family has been an ongoing process complicated by the public nature of their loss and the continued media attention surrounding the case. They have channeled their grief into advocacy work, establishing foundations focused on domestic violence, prevention, and support for other families dealing with missing person cases. Their efforts to turn their tragedy into a force for positive change have provided them with a sense of purpose while honoring their daughter's memory. The Spread Creek area where Gabby's body was discovered has become an informal memorial site, with visitors leaving flowers, stones, and personal mementos in her honor. The National Park Service has struggled with how to manage this public expression of grief while preserving the natural environment and respecting the solemnity of the location. The site serves as a physical reminder of the tragedy while also representing the public connection that millions of people felt to Gabby's story. As the immediate media attention has faded and new cases have captured public interest, Gabby's story continues to resonate in ways both seen and unseen. Domestic violence organizations report that they still receive donations and support references made to her case, suggesting that her story has had a lasting impact on public awareness of these issues. The conversations her case prompted about missing person coverage, domestic violence recognition, and social media reality continue in academic, policy, and advocacy circles. The wilderness where Gabby spent her final days remains largely unchanged by the tragedy that occurred there. The aspens still turn gold in autumn, the creeks still flow clear and cold toward the Snake River, and the Teton Peaks still rise in stunning majesty above the forest floor. But for those who knew her story and the investigators who worked tirelessly to find her, the Spread Creek area will forever be marked by the memory of a young woman whose dreams of adventure ended in unimaginable tragedy. The questions raised by Gabby's case continue to challenge law enforcement, social service providers, media organizations, and society as a whole. How can we better recognize and respond to domestic violence? How can we ensure that all missing persons receive appropriate attention and resources? How can we balance constitutional rights with moral obligations? How can we use social media and technology to help solve cases while protecting privacy and preventing harassment? These questions don't have easy answers, but Gabby's story provides a compelling case study for grappling with them. Her death was a tragedy that never should have happened, but the conversations and changes it has prompted may help prevent similar tragedies in the future. In that sense, her influence continues to ripple outward from the remote Wyoming wilderness, where her journey ended, touching lives and potentially saving them in ways that would have been impossible to imagine during those desperate weeks when her family was simply hoping she would come home. The van that carried Gabby on her final journey sits now in an evidence warehouse, a silent witness to dreams deferred and a life cut short. But the story it could tell of love and fear, hope and desperation, beauty and violence, continues to speak through the voices of those who refuse to let her death be forgotten or her case be closed without meaning. In the end, that may be the most important legacy of all, that Gabby Petito's name will be remembered not just for how she died, but for how her story helped others live safer, more aware, and more connected to the people they love. The investigation that began with a worried mother's phone call and ended in a remote corner of the American wilderness has concluded, but its impact continues to unfold in courtrooms and classrooms, in policy discussions and personal conversations, in the decisions made by other young women contemplating life on the road, and the actions taken by family members who notice warning signs in their loved ones' relationships. Gabby's journey may have ended at Spread Creek, but her story's journey through American consciousness has only just begun.